The penthouse shimmered, a testament to our success. From our perch high above the city, the world stretched out beneath us, a tapestry of twinkling lights and muted sounds. Amelia, my wife, stood by the panoramic window, a silhouette against the cityscape. She held a glass of wine, the ruby liquid catching the light, mirroring the subtle glow from the diamonds adorning her slender neck. Everything about our life together seemed meticulously curated, polished to a high sheen. We were the picture of a power couple. Amelia, the acclaimed art consultant, and myself, Richard, the architect whose designs graced magazine covers and redefined the city skyline. We'd built this life together, brick by meticulously laid brick. Our early years had been a whirlwind of shared dreams and late-night brainstorming sessions, fueled by ambition and a shared vision. We'd celebrated every milestone. The first major commission, the opening of her gallery, the purchase of this very penthouse. Each accomplishment cemented our bond, weaving it into the very fabric of our shared existence. Or so I thought. Tonight, however, a subtle dissonance disrupted the harmony. Amelia seemed distant, her gaze fixed on the horizon, but I sensed her thoughts were miles away. She'd been like this for weeks, a quiet withdrawal that I initially attributed to the pressures of her demanding career. The art world was a fickle mistress, demanding constant attention and unwavering dedication. I understood that. I, too, knew the relentless pursuit of perfection, the weight of expectations. I approached her, placing my hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched slightly, a barely perceptible tremor that sent a ripple of unease through me. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" I murmured, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She replied, her voice barely a whisper. She turned, her eyes meeting mine, but there was a strange hollowness in their depths, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. "It is." We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us, thick with unspoken words. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, to break through the wall she'd erected around herself, but a strange premonition held me back. I sensed that the answer, whatever it might be, was something I wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I poured myself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid of familiar comfort. We made small talk about her latest exhibition, about a potential new project for my firm, the usual pleasantries that filled our evenings. But beneath the surface, a disquieting feeling lingered, a nagging suspicion that something was amiss. The gilded cage we'd built together suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed prison, and I had the unsettling feeling that the walls were beginning to close in. The unease that had settled over me that evening lingered, a persistent hum beneath the surface of our carefully constructed reality. I found myself observing Amelia more closely, scrutinizing her every move, searching for clues to explain her distant demeanor. Her late-night work calls became more frequent, whispered conversations held in hushed tones, always just out of earshot. She'd retreat to her study, the door firmly closed, the muted murmur of her voice seeping through the thick wood. When I asked her about these calls, she'd brush me off with a vague explanation about a demanding client or a last-minute change to an exhibition. I wanted to believe her, to dismiss the nagging doubts that gnawed at me, but the pieces didn't quite fit. There were other subtle shifts, almost imperceptible on their own, but collectively, they painted a picture that disturbed me. A new perfume, subtly floral, replaced her usual signature scent. A sudden interest in a restaurant she'd previously dismissed as too trendy. A change in her wardrobe, a move towards more form-fitting styles that seemed uncharacteristic. These small details, insignificant in isolation, began to weave a narrative in my mind, a narrative I desperately wanted to reject. I tried to rationalize my anxieties. Perhaps I was simply projecting my own insecurities. Perhaps Amelia was going through a personal crisis, something she wasn't ready to share. I considered talking to her, confronting her with my concerns, but the fear of what I might discover held me back. I was afraid of shattering the illusion of our perfect life, of exposing the cracks in the facade we'd so carefully constructed. Instead, I buried myself in my work, throwing myself into a new project, a high-profile commission that demanded all my attention. The long hours and intricate designs provided a welcome distraction, a way to silence the whispers of doubt that echoed in the back of my mind. But even as I pored over blueprints and architectural models, Amelia's image lingered, her distant gaze, the subtle changes in her behavior, the unspoken secrets that hung heavy in the air between us. I felt like a man standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that the ground beneath him was about to give way, but powerless to stop the fall. The gilded cage we'd built together was beginning to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a trap, and I was starting to suspect that I wasn't the only one imprisoned within its walls. The truth, as it often does, arrived not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, insidious whisper. It was a Tuesday evening. Amelia had told me she had a gallery opening to attend, a new artist she was representing. I'd planned to work late at the office, finalizing the details for the Peterson Tower project. I told her I'd likely be home late, a casual goodbye, a peck on the cheek, and we went our separate ways. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to call it a night. I packed up my briefcase and headed for the parking garage. As I walked towards my car, I noticed a familiar figure leaning against a sleek, dark sedan. It was David, my closest friend, the man who'd stood by my side through thick and thin, the best man at our wedding. He was talking on his phone, his voice low and urgent. I couldn't hear the words, but his body language, the way he shifted his weight from foot to foot, the nervous glances he cast around him, suggested a clandestine conversation. I almost called out to him, but something stopped me. An instinct, a gut feeling told me to stay back, to observe. David ended his call and turned towards the car. And then I saw her, Amelia. She emerged from the shadows, her face illuminated by the dim light of the parking garage. She was smiling, a soft, intimate smile that I hadn't seen directed at me in months. David opened the car door for her, and she slipped inside. He closed the door gently, then leaned in through the open window, his face close to hers. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the intimacy in their gestures, the way they looked at each other, a shared secret that excluded me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and numb. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a scene unfold from a distance, a play acted out by strangers. I watched as David got into the car and drove away, Amelia beside him. I stood there, frozen. The image of their intertwined figures burned into my mind. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The late-night calls, the new perfume, the change in her wardrobe, the distant gaze. It all made sense now, a devastating clarity that shattered the illusion of our perfect life. The whispers of doubt that I tried to ignore now screamed in my ears, confirming my worst fears. My wife, the woman I trusted with my heart, my life, had betrayed me, and she'd done it with the man I considered my closest friend. The gilded cage had become a prison, and I was trapped inside, not with Amelia, but with the gnawing realization of her betrayal. The pain was a physical ache, a hollow emptiness that threatened to consume me. I felt like a part of me had died that night, a part that I knew I could never recover. The drive home was a blur. I navigated the streets on autopilot, my mind reeling from the images I'd witnessed in the parking garage. The city lights seemed to mock me, their vibrant glow a stark contrast to the darkness that had enveloped my soul. I parked the car in the garage and walked into the penthouse, the silence echoing the emptiness within me. Amelia wasn't home yet. I poured myself a stiff drink, the alcohol burning a path down my throat, a temporary distraction from the searing pain in my chest. I waited. Every tick of the clock amplified the tension, each passing minute a lifetime. Finally, I heard the elevator ding, and the front door opened. Amelia walked in, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with a feverish excitement I hadn't seen in years. She stopped short when she saw me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Richard," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. "You're home early. I thought you were working late." "I was," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "But I decided to come home." She walked towards me, her hand outstretched, but I stepped back, avoiding her touch. The sight of her, the smell of her perfume, the very air she breathed, filled me with a revulsion I couldn't disguise. "What's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "You look pale." "Doi," I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. Perhaps it's the shock of seeing my wife return home from a late-night rendezvous with my best friend. The blood drained from her face, leaving her ashen. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She stared at me, her eyes wide with panic, a trapped animal caught in the headlights. "Don't bother denying it, Amelia," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I saw you, in the parking garage, with David." The denial came as I knew it would. A stammering attempt to explain, a flimsy excuse about a last-minute meeting, a desperate attempt to salvage the crumbling facade of her deception. But I wouldn't let her. I confronted her with the evidence, the details I'd observed, the inconsistencies in her stories. Her denials grew weaker, her voice faltering, until finally, she broke down, the carefully constructed mask of innocence shattering into a million pieces. The confession was a torrent of words, a desperate attempt to justify her actions, to explain the unexplainable. She spoke of feeling neglected, unappreciated, of a longing for something more, something she claimed I couldn't give her. She spoke of David's understanding, his attentiveness, the way he made her feel alive. But her words were like daggers, each one twisting deeper into the wound of my betrayal. I listened, my face impassive, my heart a block of ice. The woman standing before me was a stranger, her words a foreign language. The Amelia I knew, the woman I loved, had vanished, replaced by a hollow shell, a liar, a cheat. The gilded cage had become a torture chamber, and I was the prisoner, bound by the chains of her deceit. The confession was not a catharsis, not a release. It was a descent into a deeper circle of hell, a plunge into the abyss of betrayal. Amelia's words, instead of offering clarity, only muddied the waters further. Her justifications, her attempts to shift the blame, to paint herself as the victim, fueled the flames of my rage. The affair, it turned out, was not a fleeting indiscretion, a moment of weakness. It was a full-blown emotional entanglement, a clandestine relationship that had been woven into the fabric of our lives for months. Secret rendezvous disguised as business meetings, stolen weekends away under the pretense of work commitments, whispered phone calls late into the night. They had built their own world, a world of shared secrets and forbidden desires, a world from which I was completely excluded. The depth of their deception was staggering. They had met in our home, under my very nose, their clandestine encounters hidden behind a veil of normalcy. David, my trusted friend, had broken bread at my table, shared my laughter, offered me his support, all the while betraying me in the most intimate way possible. The realization that the two people I trusted most in the world had conspired against me was a blow I wasn't sure I could recover from. As Amelia spoke, I saw a different side to her, a side I hadn't known existed. The vulnerability I had cherished, the sensitivity I had admired, now seemed like a carefully crafted facade, a mask she wore to conceal her true nature. The woman I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger. A woman driven by desires I didn't recognize. A woman who was capable of inflicting such profound pain. The pain was not just emotional. It was physical. A tightness in my chest, a knot in my stomach, a constant nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the images that haunted my waking hours. Amelia and David, their hands intertwined, their lips locked in a passionate embrace, their laughter echoing in the empty chambers of my heart. The gilded cage had become a suffocating prison, the walls closing in, the air thick with the stench of betrayal. I felt like a drowning man, gasping for air, struggling to stay afloat in a sea of despair. The abyss of their betrayal had opened up beneath me, and I was falling into the darkness, with no hope of escape. The days that followed were a blur of numbness. I moved through life like an automaton, going through the motions, fulfilling my obligations, maintaining a facade of normalcy. I went to work, attended meetings, made decisions, all the while feeling like a hollow shell, a ghost inhabiting a world that no longer held any meaning. I told no one about Amelia's betrayal. The shame was too great, the wound too raw. I couldn't bear the thought of pitying glances, the whispered gossip, the inevitable questions. So I kept up appearances, playing the role of the successful architect, the devoted husband, the man who had it all. But behind the mask of sanity, a storm was brewing, a tempest of rage and hurt that threatened to consume me. I watched Amelia closely, observing her every move, listening to her every word. She seemed oblivious to the turmoil she had unleashed, going about her life as if nothing had changed. She continued to attend her gallery openings, her charity events, her social gatherings, her laughter ringing hollow in my ears. The ease with which she slipped back into her old life, the nonchalance with which she dismissed her betrayal, fueled my resentment. I found myself unable to be in the same room with her. The sight of her, the sound of her voice, the very air she breathed, filled me with a loathing I could barely contain. I retreated to my study, surrounding myself with blueprints and architectural models, seeking solace in the familiar world of lines and angles, concrete and steel. But even there, I couldn't escape the memories, the images of their betrayal that haunted my waking hours. The nights were the worst. Sleep eluded me, replaced by a relentless replay of the events that had led to this point. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, my body consumed by a restless energy. I thought of confronting David, of unleashing my fury on him, but the thought of physical violence held no appeal. I wanted something more, something that would cut deeper, something that would leave a lasting scar. A plan began to form in my mind, a seed of an idea that took root and grew, nurtured by my anger, my hurt, my thirst for revenge. It was a plan that would require patience, cunning, and a ruthless determination. It was a plan that would destroy them both, slowly, methodically, leaving them with nothing but the ashes of their betrayal. The mask of sanity I wore was a shield, concealing the darkness within, the cold, calculating rage that would fuel my revenge. The gilded cage had become a battleground, and I was ready to fight. The first step was knowledge. I needed to understand my enemies, to map their weaknesses, to identify their vulnerabilities. I became a detective, a shadow, observing their movements, intercepting their communications, piecing together the intricate web of their deceit. Technology became my ally. I installed discreet surveillance software on Amelia's phone, granting me access to her calls, her messages, her emails. I tracked her location, monitored her online activity, built a detailed picture of her movements. The more I learned, the deeper my disgust grew. Their affair was not just a physical act. It was an emotional betrayal, a shared world of intimate secrets and whispered promises. I read their messages, their declarations of love, their plans for the future, each word a dagger twisting in my heart. David, I discovered, was not the man I thought he was. Beneath the charming exterior, the successful facade, lay a web of deceit and manipulation. He had a history of infidelity, a trail of broken hearts and shattered trust. He was a predator, preying on vulnerable women, using his charm and charisma to get what he wanted. And Amelia, blinded by her infatuation, had fallen prey to his manipulations. I delved into their finances, tracing their transactions, uncovering hidden accounts, revealing a pattern of extravagance and deceit. David, it seemed, was not as successful as he pretended to be. He was living beyond his means, his lavish lifestyle funded by a series of risky investments and questionable business dealings. Amelia, in her naivete, had become entangled in his financial web, her own resources slowly being siphoned off to support his extravagant lifestyle. The knowledge I gathered fueled my anger, but it also gave me a sense of control. I was no longer a passive victim, a pawn in their game. I was the architect of my own destiny, the master of my own fate. I would use their weaknesses against them, turning their deceit into their downfall. The gilded cage was no longer a prison. It was a chessboard, and I was ready to play. I began to formulate my plan, carefully crafting each move, anticipating their reactions, ensuring that the consequences of their betrayal would be devastating. I would not resort to physical violence. That was too crude, too obvious. My revenge would be more subtle, more insidious, a slow burn that would consume them both from the inside out. I would strip them of their reputations, their finances, their very sense of self. I would make them pay for their sins, not with blood, but with something far more precious: their happiness. My first strike was subtle, a carefully placed seed of doubt. David, I knew, prided himself on his professional reputation. He was a rising star in the financial world, his name synonymous with success and integrity. I decided to tarnish that reputation, to chip away at the foundation of his carefully constructed image. I began by planting rumors, subtle whispers of discontent, veiled questions about his investment strategies, his business dealings. I used my own network of contacts, my influence in the business community, to spread these seeds of doubt, to create an undercurrent of suspicion that would slowly erode his credibility. I leaked information about his financial difficulties, his risky investments, his questionable partnerships. I hinted at improprieties, suggesting that his success was built on a foundation of deceit and manipulation. I watched as the rumors spread, gaining momentum, taking on a life of their own. David's clients began to ask questions. His colleagues began to distance themselves. His superiors began to scrutinize his every move. The pressure mounted, the cracks in his facade widening. He became defensive, his usual charm replaced by a nervous irritability. He tried to counter the rumors, to reassure his clients, to maintain his image of success, but the damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been sown, and they were beginning to take root. Amelia, oblivious to my machinations, remained caught in her web of infatuation. She saw David as a victim, a man unfairly targeted by jealous rivals and malicious gossip. She defended him fiercely, her loyalty unwavering, her blindness to his true nature fueling my anger. I watched their relationship unravel, the strain of David's professional woes taking its toll. Their secret rendezvous became less frequent, their phone calls shorter, their messages less passionate. The joy they had found in their shared deceit was fading, replaced by anxiety and suspicion. The gilded cage they had built for themselves was beginning to crumble, the walls closing in, the air thick with the stench of their impending downfall. My first move had been successful. I had struck at the heart of David's power, his reputation. The next move would be even more devastating, aimed at isolating Amelia, stripping her of her support system, leaving her vulnerable and alone. The game was afoot, and I was playing to win. With David's professional life teetering on the brink, I turned my attention to Amelia. She had always been a social butterfly, surrounded by a coterie of friends and admirers. Her charm, her wit, her impeccable taste had made her a popular figure in the city's social circles. I decided to exploit this, to turn her social connections against her, to isolate her from the very people she relied on for support. I began subtly, planting seeds of doubt about her loyalty, her judgment, her character. I hinted at her involvement in David's financial troubles, suggesting that she was complicit in his deceit. I spread rumors about her infidelity, painting her as a manipulative seductress, a woman who used her charm to get what she wanted. I used my own social connections, my position in the community, to amplify these whispers, to ensure they reached the right ears. I watched as her friends began to distance themselves, their invitations becoming less frequent, their phone calls less enthusiastic. Her social circle, once a source of strength and support, began to shrink, leaving her increasingly isolated. Amelia, initially oblivious to the shift in her social dynamics, attributed it to the pressures of her work, the demands of her social calendar. But as the isolation grew, she began to realize that something was amiss. She sensed the whispers, the averted glances, the subtle snubs. Her confidence wavered, her laughter less frequent, her smile less bright. I watched her retreat into herself, her world shrinking, her support system crumbling. She became increasingly dependent on David, clinging to him as her only source of comfort and validation. But David, consumed by his own problems, was unable to provide the support she needed. His attention wavered, his affection dimmed, his patience wearing thin. The gilded cage that had once been a symbol of their shared success had become a prison, isolating them from the world, trapping them in a cycle of deceit and despair. Amelia, once the queen of her social circle, was now a pariah, shunned by the very people she had once considered her friends. She was alone, vulnerable, and completely dependent on a man who was himself on the verge of ruin. My plan was working. I had successfully isolated Amelia, stripping her of her social support, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The next step would be to strike at her financial security, to remove the final pillar of her independence, to leave her with nothing but the consequences of her betrayal. With Amelia isolated and vulnerable, I turned my attention to her finances. She had always been financially independent, a successful businesswoman in her own right. But her affair with David had blinded her to his financial manipulations, his subtle siphoning of her resources to support his extravagant lifestyle. I decided to exploit this, to tighten the financial noose, to leave her with nothing but the bitter taste of her own poor choices. I began subtly suggesting changes to their joint accounts, redirecting funds, making investments in her name that were, in reality, benefiting me. I used my knowledge of her financial affairs, gleaned from years of shared finances and my own expertise in the business world, to manipulate her assets, to shift the balance of power in my favor. I encouraged her to invest in David's ventures, painting them as lucrative opportunities, while subtly undermining his credibility with his investors, ensuring that these ventures would ultimately fail. I watched as her money disappeared, her savings dwindled, her financial security eroded. Amelia, initially trusting of my advice, began to question my motives as her financial situation worsened. But by then it was too late. I had woven a web of financial deceit, a complex network of transactions and investments that were impossible to unravel. She was trapped, her financial independence shattered, her future uncertain. The gilded cage that had once represented their shared wealth and success had become a symbol of her financial ruin. The walls were closing in, the bars tightening, the air thick with the stench of her impending poverty. She had traded her financial security for a fleeting affair, a foolish infatuation that had cost her everything. My plan was nearing completion. I had isolated Amelia, stripped her of her social support, and destroyed her financial security. The next step would be the most devastating, the public revelation of her betrayal, the final blow that would shatter her reputation and leave her with nothing but the shame of her actions. The game was almost over, and I was about to deliver the checkmate. The time had come to unveil the truth, to expose Amelia and David's betrayal to the world. I had orchestrated this moment carefully, ensuring maximum impact, choosing the perfect stage for their public downfall. The annual charity gala, a glittering event attended by the city's elite, was the ideal setting. Amelia, always a prominent figure at these gatherings, would be expecting a night of celebration, a chance to bask in the admiration of her peers. Instead, she would be met with the cold, hard reality of her betrayal. I arranged for a discreet photographer to be present, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. I planted rumors among the guests, whispers of infidelity, hints of financial impropriety, creating an atmosphere of anticipation and suspicion. Then, at the height of the evening, as Amelia and David stood together, basking in the attention of the crowd, I made my move. I approached them, my face impassive, my voice steady. "Amelia," I said, loud enough for all to hear, "I believe you have something to tell our friends." The blood drained from her face, her eyes widening in panic. David, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, tried to intervene, but I silenced him with a look. "Don't interrupt, David," I said, my voice laced with contempt. "This is between Amelia and me." I turned back to Amelia, my gaze unwavering. "Tell them, Amelia," I said. "Tell them about your affair. Tell them about your betrayal. Tell them about how you've been lying to all of us." The silence was deafening. All eyes were on Amelia, her shame palpable. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked around the room, her gaze meeting the shocked and disapproving faces of her friends and colleagues. The realization of her public humiliation, the shattering of her carefully constructed image, was too much to bear. She broke down, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with sobs. David, his own reputation in tatters, tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away. The crowd, initially stunned into silence, erupted in a cacophony of whispers and gasps. The photographer, positioned discreetly in the corner, captured every moment of the drama. The images destined to be splashed across the society pages the next day. Amelia and David fled the gala, their shame and humiliation trailing behind them like a shroud. The gilded cage they had built for themselves had been shattered, the walls crumbling, the bars broken. They were exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The public spectacle was complete. The aftermath of the gala was swift and brutal. The news of Amelia and David's affair spread like wildfire, fueled by the scandalous photos and the gossip of the city's elite. Amelia, once a respected figure in the art world, became a pariah, shunned by her colleagues, her reputation in tatters. Her gallery, once a thriving hub of creativity and commerce, was now deserted, its doors closed, its future uncertain. David's fate was no better. His professional life, already teetering on the brink, collapsed completely. His clients abandoned him, his investors withdrew their support, his colleagues distanced themselves. He was a disgraced figure, his name synonymous with deceit and betrayal. But the public humiliation was just the beginning. The real damage was the emotional devastation, the slow, agonizing erosion of their self-worth. Amelia, once confident and vivacious, retreated into a shell of her former self. She was haunted by the memories of the gala, the shocked faces of her friends, the whispers of disapproval, the public spectacle of her downfall. She became withdrawn, isolating herself from the world, her days spent in a haze of depression and despair. The joy she had once found in her work, her social life, her very existence, was gone, replaced by a gnawing emptiness, a sense of profound loss. David, stripped of his professional success and social standing, spiraled into a pit of self-pity and resentment. He blamed Amelia for his downfall, his anger and frustration fueling his destructive tendencies. Their relationship, once a source of passion and excitement, became toxic, a vicious cycle of recrimination and blame. The gilded cage they had built for themselves had become a tomb, encasing them in their own misery, their shared shame and regret. The walls were closing in, the air thick with the stench of their decaying relationship, their dreams and aspirations crumbling into dust. I watched their descent with a cold satisfaction, my revenge taking its toll. But even as I savored their pain, a part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. They had made their choices, they had paid the price, but the punishment seemed almost too cruel. The abyss they had gazed into had gazed back, and it had consumed them both. With Amelia and David broken and defeated, I should have felt a sense of triumph, a vindication of my righteous anger. But as I surveyed the wreckage of their lives, a hollow ache settled in my chest. The victory felt empty, the satisfaction fleeting. I had achieved my goal. I had exposed their betrayal, destroyed their reputations, and shattered their happiness. They were shadows of their former selves, their lives in ruins, their futures uncertain. But in the process, I had also destroyed a part of myself. The anger that had fueled my revenge had consumed me, leaving me hollow and exhausted. The meticulous planning, the calculated manipulation, the relentless pursuit of their downfall had taken its toll. I had become a stranger to myself, a man driven by darkness, a puppet master pulling the strings of their destruction. The gilded cage that had once been our shared home was now a desolate space, filled with the ghosts of our past. The laughter, the love, the shared dreams had all vanished, replaced by a chilling silence, a constant reminder of what I had lost. I found myself wandering the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. I looked at Amelia's abandoned easel, her brushes lying dormant, her canvases blank. I remembered her passion for art, the joy she had found in creating beauty, the spark in her eyes when she spoke of her latest project. That spark was gone now, extinguished by the flames of my revenge. I thought of David, his once booming voice now reduced to a whisper, his confident stride replaced by a shuffling gait. I remembered his ambition, his drive, his infectious enthusiasm. That fire was gone now, quenched by the ashes of his ruined career. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. The revenge I had craved had left me with nothing but emptiness, a profound sense of loss that gnawed at my soul. The gilded cage had become a prison, not just for Amelia and David, but for me as well. I was trapped in the wreckage of my own making, haunted by the ghosts of my past, the specter of my own cruelty.